All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're going to try to untangle this hormone, this cortisol thing. You probably heard of it, maybe seen it on a blood test. But what is it really doing? We're going deep, seeing how it affects energy, stress, the whole nine yards.
And we're going way past just calling it the stress hormone. We'll figure out what those log numbers actually mean and how cortisol affects your health in some pretty surprising ways.
Yeah, I have to admit, when I see cortisol in those lab reports, I kind of glaze over. So, back to basics. What is cortisol?
Okay, so picture this. You're waking up, right? And cortisol's already at work, like this tiny little manager inside you getting everything going. Cortisol's a steroid hormone made in these little glands, adrenal glands. They sit right on top of your kidneys, almost like little hats.
Adrenal glands. Okay, never really pictured them as like fashionable kidney hats, but I like it.
That's a good way to remember where they are. But anyway, back to cortisol itself. It's involved in a ton of stuff your body does. Like how you use energy, it actually helps you break down carbs, fats, even protein.
So it's not just about stress then. Seems like it's got a pretty big job.
Huge job. Think of it like this. Cortisol is tied into your metabolism,
Huh?
how you turn the food you eat into energy for your day. It also helps control inflammation, making sure things don't get out of hand. And it even keeps your blood pressure stable. Keeps those blood vessels happy.
Wow, I'm already learning things. I always thought it was all stress, stress, stress. But it's really like this behind-the-scenes manager keeping things running smoothly.
That's it. And of course, it does play a big part in your stress response, that fight or flight feeling.
Right.
When you're facing a challenge, your body releases cortisol, gives you energy, focus, so you can either deal with it or run away.
Right, that makes sense. But if it's all about balance, how do we even know what our levels are? I guess that's where the lab tests come in, right? But those things, they're like a secret code to me.
I get it. Those lab reports can be a little intimidating. So let's break it down. We've got three main ways to check cortisol: blood tests, urine tests, and saliva tests.
Okay, I'm ready to play detective. Which one's the most common, and what are they even looking for?
Most of the time, it's a blood test. They'll usually measure it in the morning and the afternoon to see how it changes throughout the day, kind of like checking in on cortisol at different points in its routine.
Wait, cortisol has a schedule. That's news to me. What's so special about the morning and afternoon?
Well, cortisol actually follows this pretty predictable pattern. It's called diurnal variation. Fancy way of saying it changes throughout the day. And get this, it actually peaks in the morning, giving you that energy and focus to start your day.
Hold on, really? I thought cortisol was supposed to be low when we're relaxed. Why would it be highest when we wake up?
I know, right? Seems a bit counterintuitive. But think of that morning surge as your built-in alarm clock and coffee combined. It gets your metabolism going, you feel alert and ready for the day. Then, as the day goes on, cortisol levels gradually go down. They reach their lowest point at night when you're supposed to be resting.
So it's like a roller coaster. Up in the morning, then down we go.
In a way, yeah. More like a gentle slope down, though. And we have those other tests to get the full picture. Urine tests, they measure the total amount of cortisol you make in a whole day. It's less about specific times and more about the overall amount.
Sounds intense. You're collecting all your pee for a whole day. What about the saliva tests? How do those work?
Saliva tests are cool. They're often used to check your cortisol rhythm, especially how low it gets at night. Way easier than a blood test. Gives a glimpse of how your cortisol is doing when you're winding down.
So many ways to check this thing out. But hold on, what are we even looking for in the results? What are the normal levels?
Great question. For blood tests, morning cortisol is usually between 6 and 23 micrograms per deciliter. By the afternoon, it drops to between 3 and 15. Urine tests, they measure over a day. Normals between 10 and 100 micrograms. And for saliva, especially those bedtime ones, ideally below 0.09 micrograms per deciliter.
Lots of numbers, so if I'm in those ranges, I'm golden.
Not so fast. Those are just general guidelines. Each lab might have slightly different ranges, so always check your results against what your lab says is normal.
Like different measuring sticks. Gotta use the right one. And it's not just about the numbers themselves, right? There's more to the story.
Absolutely. There's a lot more to unravel when it comes to figuring out what these levels mean and how they fit into your overall health.
Okay, now you've got me hooked. What happens when those levels go off the rails?
It's like, imagine cortisol levels are like a roller coaster, right? You get that big climb in the morning, then it kind of levels out as the day goes on. But what if it gets stuck at the top or, bottoms out suddenly?
Okay, now I'm nervous. So, high cortisol, too much of it hanging around. We're not running from tigers all the time, so what's keeping it up there?
Right. These days, our stress isn't usually life or death, but our bodies, they kind of react like it is. Chronically high cortisol can come from all sorts of stress. Work, relationships, that to-do list that never ends. It's like you're stuck in fight or flight mode, even when there's no real danger.
So even though we're not facing down a saber-toothed tiger, our body thinks we are. That can't be good. What kind of health problems can happen with too much cortisol?
Well, there's Cushing's syndrome. That's a big one. It's when your body's making way too much cortisol. Could be a few reasons why. Sometimes it's the adrenal glands themselves, maybe a tumor making them go into overdrive. Other times, it's the pituitary gland that's in your brain. It's like the control center for hormones. If it's sending out the wrong signals, your adrenal glands just keep pumping out cortisol.
So it's like a miscommunication in hormone headquarters, and all
Yeah.
that extra cortisol is causing trouble.
You got it. And all that extra cortisol, it can lead to a bunch of symptoms. Weight gain, especially around the middle,
Mm.
stress belly, high blood pressure, your bones can get weaker. You might even have mood swings, anxiety, even depression.
So it's not just physical, it messes with your mind too. But is it always Cushing's? What about all that everyday stress we were talking about?
Yeah, chronic stress is a huge factor for high cortisol. If you're stressed out all the time, your body's pumping out that cortisol even when you don't need it, like your alarm system's always on, and that can really wear you down over time.
Makes sense, but also sounds kind of unavoidable these days. Anything else that can sneakily cause high cortisol?
A few things, yeah. Some medications, like corticosteroids, they're used for inflammation, but if you take them for all time, they can raise your cortisol. And sometimes tumors in the adrenal glands themselves can cause them to make too much cortisol.
So it's not always a simple answer. Sounds like figuring out high cortisol can be a real puzzle, but we've talked a lot about high levels. What about when they're too low? What's going on then?
Low cortisol, that's a whole other issue. And it shows up in different ways. One of the main things is Addison's disease. That's where the adrenal glands just aren't making enough cortisol. Like the opposite of Cushing's, instead of the faucet being on full blast, it's barely a trickle.
So now our bodies are running on empty. Would that make you feel more tired than like wired and stressed?
You'd think so, right? That low cortisol would mean you're calm and relaxed. But when it's chronically low, you can get all sorts of symptoms. Fatigue that just doesn't go away, muscle weakness, even low blood pressure, which can make you dizzy or even faint.
Sounds exhausting. Is it always Addison's disease causing that?
It's a common one, but there's also something called secondary adrenal insufficiency. This time, it's not the adrenal glands themselves, it's the pituitary gland, that control center we talked about. If it's not sending the right signals, the adrenal glands don't make enough cortisol, even though they could.
Back to that miscommunication, huh? Seems like that pituitary gland is pretty important. But are these low cortisol things always from a disease? Or can other stuff cause it too?
Well, like with high cortisol, some infections, especially if they affect the adrenal glands, can mess with their ability to make enough cortisol. And, if you're going through a lot of physical stress for a long time, that can also lead to low cortisol. It's all about how your body reacts.
So it's like our bodies are always trying to find that middle ground, the perfect balance. But with all these causes for both high and low cortisol, how do we even start making sense of it? What's the main takeaway here?
I think the biggest takeaway is that cortisol is powerful stuff.
Yeah.
It affects our bodies in so many ways. And understanding how those levels can change, that's crucial for feeling good. But you can't just look at a number on a lab report. You have to look at the whole person, their symptoms, their medical history, everything that could be affecting those levels.
So it's more than just a stress hormone, it's part of how our bodies work every day.
You got it. And if you're having any of the symptoms we talked about, whether it's high or low cortisol, talk to your doctor. They can figure out if it's really a cortisol problem and what to do about it.
Right. No self-diagnosing, go see a professional. But let's talk more about understanding those lab results. What else should people know? We've covered the different tests and how levels change during the day, but are there any other things to keep in mind?
One thing we haven't touched on is knowing when not to test. Like if you're sick or you've just gone through something really stressful, like losing someone close, your cortisol might be high just because of that. Testing then could give you a misleading result.
So it's like trying to take a photo when the camera's shaking. You're not going to get a clear picture.
Exactly. Timing matters when you're testing cortisol. Your doctor can help you figure out the best time to get the most accurate results. It's all about understanding the bigger picture, not just focusing on one number.
Man, this hormone is complicated. It's not just high or low. It's this whole intricate thing with so many factors involved.
It's a fascinating system for sure. And remember, cortisol is just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to your health. You have to look at everything, your lifestyle, your environment, even your genes, to make good decisions about your health.
I gotta say, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me. Cortisol, it's not just about stress. It's like this hidden conductor keeping all these different parts of our bodies in sync.
Yeah, it's amazing how much there still is to learn about this hormone, how it's
Yeah.
connected to our health. It's like this whole web of interactions. We're just starting to figure it out.
It really makes you appreciate how incredible our bodies are, all those connections. So as we wrap things up here, what's the big takeaway you want people to remember about cortisol?
I think it's that cortisol itself isn't good or bad. It's about balance. Too much, too little, that's when you run into problems.
Mm.
But finding that sweet spot, that's what matters for feeling good.
Balance seems like that's the key for a lot of things when it comes to health. And with cortisol, so many things can affect that balance. Our genes, our lifestyle, even what's going on around us, our thoughts, our feelings. It's a lot to keep track of.
Definitely. But even small changes can make a difference, like getting enough sleep. That can have a huge impact on your cortisol and how you feel overall.
Talking about lifestyle, I was thinking, our modern life, always go, go, go. Could that be messing with our cortisol? Always information, deadlines, like our brains never get a break. Could that be throwing things off?
That's a great point, and researchers are looking into that more and more. It makes sense. All that stimulation, pressure, no real downtime could definitely lead to having high cortisol all the time.
Like we're kind of forcing our bodies into this low-level stress mode. The cortisol roller coaster just keeps climbing.
Yeah, it's a real concern. That's why it's so important to find ways to manage stress, build it into your day. Things like mindfulness, being out in nature, even just taking a few minutes to breathe deeply. That can make a big difference.
It's a reminder that self-care is important. It's not selfish. It's how we keep our bodies in balance, including those cortisol levels. Got to give that roller coaster a break. But let's be real, stress happens. What else can people do to help keep their cortisol in check, even when things are crazy?
Oh, definitely. Regular exercise, that's fantastic for cortisol. Helps your body deal with stress, bounce back from tough stuff. Eating healthy, lots of whole foods, that helps too. Give your body the nutrients it needs to handle the stress.
It's about giving our bodies what they need to thrive, not just survive, right? This has been such a great reminder that our bodies are amazing, complex things, and even small changes, they can really add up. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into cortisol.
It was my pleasure. And for everyone listening, keep learning, keep asking questions about your health. The more you understand, the better choices you can make for yourself.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, stay curious and remember, knowledge is power when it comes to your health.
You've been listening to the Learning Podcast, a production of metaNESTA. Remember, learning is a journey, one step, one insight, one skill at a time. We'll see you next time. Keep learning, stay curious, and as always, be awesome.